Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Professor Thomas Cassidy in the Department of English at South Carolina State University, and it is my great privilege and joy tonight to be able to welcome you to our second in a series of 4 interactive virtual programs on words across the water, writing and culture across the Black Atlantic. Program theme tonight is Forbidden Words and Transgressions. A word about that theme. You probably know that this is the American Library Association Banned Books Week, or they now call it Banned and Challenged Books because there are more ways than one of banning books. And so we asked the writers to think about that. Words don't necessarily have to be banned by an authority to be somewhat forbidden or unwelcome to the larger society at times. Words are aggressive even when they are accepted, and they can be forgotten even when they're not banned. So the theme is open, and we hope our writers will have interesting takes on it. Words Across the Water explores the intersections where Anglophone, Caribbean, and African-American cultural traditions meet and engage each other. Now, the idea was that we would have African and Afro-British writers as well, but that's not happening tonight. The program was begun in spring of 2021 by Dr. Frank Martin, who is a museum director at the IP Standback Museum and Planetarium, which is a full supporter and partner in this, and Dr. Allison McCletchie, who is a professor in the Department of Social Sciences here at South Carolina State University. SC Humanities supported the program, the Fast Track Literary Grant. And I'm going to introduce the panel. The moderator for this evening will be Professor Simon Lewis. He is a professor in the Department of English at Boston, where he has been teaching African and World since 1996. He is also, let me say, chair of the Faculty Senate there, which is a full-time job. He edits the literary journal Illuminations, an international magazine of contemporary writing. And he is closely associated with the Carolina Low Country and Atlantic World CLAW program. He's published White Women Writers and Their African Inventions in 2003, and British and African Literature in Transnational Contexts in 2011, with the University Press of Florida, among many other publications on particularly South African poets and novelists. He previously, as in just a few months ago, served as a moderator for the Spring Words Across the Water 2021 series, and so we're happy to welcome him back here today. Andre Bagoo is a poet and writer from Trinidad. He's the author of several books of poetry, including Trick Vessels, Burn, and Pitch Lake. His poetry has appeared in journals such as Boston Review, Cincinnati Review, St. Petersburg Review, PN Review, Poetry, and the Poetry Review. He was awarded the Charlotte and Isidore Pawonsky Prize in 2017. His essay collection, The Undiscovered Country, was published by People Tree Press in 2020, and he won the 2021 OCM Bocas Prize for Nonfiction. And by the way, please feel free to use the reaction buttons to applaud these writers, especially not only now, but as we go along. Terrance Robinson is, by comparison to Andre, he's an artist. He lives in Columbia, South Carolina. He's a professional artist and educator with an MFA from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Mr. Robinson has taught at several colleges and universities in the Midwest and South, and has exhibited his artwork at approximately plus colleges, galleries, museums, universities, and alternative spaces. Just somehow
For some reason, Dr. Cassidy has muted himself, so he's going to get back up.
I did not do it. It seems that every time I click return to try to get back, let's try this again. Mr. Robinson is an artist. MFA, he's taught throughout the Midwest and the South. His work has been exhibited at over 100 colleges, galleries, museums, universities. And right now they're part of the international exhibit of African-American art that's traveling India. His artwork has been collected by private and public collectors and has been published in many exhibition catalogs, including Roots of Change, Reaching Back and Moving Art and Moving in the Arts Council of Fayetteville, Cumberland County, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Be Human, an artist's perception and exhibit of African-American arts in collaboration with Goan Artists, Directorate of Art and Culture Panel, GOA 2021, and the exhibition of African-American art. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, Kerala in India, 2019-2020, in the 25th Annual African-American Art Exhibit, a juried art show from Actors Theater, Louisville, Kentucky. And you're probably wondering, artists here tonight. Well, I'm going to tell you, Unapologetic, his book of poetry was born out of an autobiography project written and then lost. And I hope he'll tell you some more of that story. But it was reborn 18 months later as poetry that touches the hearts, the minds, the souls of all ages. It's listed on approximately 15 to 20 platforms for sale. And with that, let me give you Professor Simon Lewis.
Hey, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Alison. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight with these two wonderful writers. And despite the technological glitches we've just had, I think we all ought to say a big shout out to Zoom for fostering us all the way through this pandemic and allowing these kinds of exchanges to happen and actually to bring people together in amazing ways. We've got folks from Trinidad and all over South Carolina, and I'm not sure where else tonight. So it's a fabulous technology and a wonderful tool that's been able to make us, I think, maintain some kind of community during the kinds of separations that we've been enduring over the last few years. So I'm going to try and step out the way. You've heard these wonderful introductions of Andre Bagoo and Terrance Robinson. The program is basically going to proceed with Andre reading first, and then Terrance. At any point in time, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will moderate that. At the end of Terrance's reading, I will start off with a couple of questions to Andre and Terrance, and then after that, we'll go to the public's responses. So I hope that's clear to everybody. And I'm really, really looking forward to this. We've got two extremely different types of poet tonight. So I think you will find what they have to say very, very intriguing, both in terms of form and of content. So over to Andre to introduce you first.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Simon. And thank you, Thomas, for having me here and inviting me to be a part of this series. Just thinking about the theme of the series, Crossing the Water, I was struck by how someone like me who lives in Trinidad, which is a society which is the product of so many different crossings, in the sense of people from India came to Trinidad, people from Africa came to Trinidad to make this thing called the Trinidadian. And here I am now making another crossing, beaming across Zoom, as Simon said, to talk about literature and art, which is the ultimate kind of crossing, if you will, which eliminates borders and empowers us to really share and come closer to different truths. So I had many options in terms of how I was going to approach this theme of banned books or forbidden words. But what first came to mind was my relationship with a specific novel, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. So I first read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha years ago in London when I was a law student in university. I had this crush on a guy who was in my contract law class, and his name was Siddhartha. And I was in a bookshop and I saw this book called Siddhartha, and I was like, what is this? This must be some key to this guy. So I picked it up and I saw it was by Hermann Hesse, and it's like, this is Nobel Prize winner. This should be interesting. And that's how I found this book. And interestingly enough, my relationship with this book, which I have returned to again and again in my life, has actually lasted much longer than my relationship with this guy who triggered it. But yes, enough about that. We're here to talk about literature. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some extracts from an experimental poetry pamphlet, which I recently published, called Writing Through Siddhartha. This pamphlet is it's inspired by quite a lot, but it really jumps off of John Cage and his experiments with Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. John Cage did a series of experiments on Finnegan's Wake. He did Writing Through Finnegan's Wake, writing for the second time through Finnegan's Wake. I think he even did Writing for the third time through Finnegan's Wake. And basically, what I have done in this experimental poetry pamphlet is I have used a computer program to perform a series of operations on the text of this novel, which has arrayed it into a series of litanies. So it's a kind of Oulipo / cento / found poem. I don't know what exactly it is, but ultimately, I think by ripping out the spine of the novel in this way, I am trying to make a point, or at least interrogate this idea of how we see books in different ways. If you're not familiar with Siddhartha, Siddhartha is a book that's about a young man who goes on a journey to find enlightenment, and he meets the Buddha at one stage. But in this journey, he makes a lot of wrong turns. At one point, he marries, or he, enters into a relationship with a woman, but that doesn't turn out to be the route to his happiness. Then he tries to become wealthy, and that doesn't work out. Then he tries to become like a criminal, and that doesn't work out. But through thick and thin, this entire journey, the one constant in his life is his best friend, Govinda, his male best friend. And by the end of the book, it is so apparent in my reading of it that this relationship has been the core of Siddhartha's life. So thinking about this theme of forbidden words and transgressions and banned books, I was struck by how, yeah, some books are banned, but sometimes we don't even ban the books. We actually ban how we interpret them or how we read them. And that reflects a process of self-censorship or sanitization. And I think this is a thing that happens a lot in literature, where if you think of writers like Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, E.M. Forster, a lot of the critical conversation about their work tends to ignore their queerness inherently. So that is basically what I feel I'm getting to here. And I think by presenting this, I'm kind of hoping that I suggest that reading itself is an act of queerness. So now I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Yes. Siddhartha also felt desire. Siddhartha also remembered everything. Siddhartha answered. Siddhartha asked his host. Siddhartha ate his own bread. Siddhartha awakened. Siddhartha began. Siddhartha bent down. Siddhartha bid his farewell. Siddhartha bowed with. Siddhartha can wait calmly. Siddhartha collapsed. Siddhartha continued. Siddhartha could. Siddhartha did. Siddhartha does. Siddhartha emerged. Siddhartha entered the chamber. Siddhartha even doubted. Siddhartha exclaimed. Siddhartha exposed himself. Siddhartha felt. Siddhartha felt his blood heating up. Siddhartha felt more. Siddhartha ferried across. Siddhartha found himself being dragged away. Siddhartha gave him. Siddhartha gave his garments. Siddhartha got. Siddhartha had. Siddhartha had also been hearing. Siddhartha had always watched. Siddhartha had assumed. Siddhartha had been partaking. Siddhartha had gotten into. Siddhartha had intended to. Siddhartha had learned. Siddhartha had lived the life. Siddhartha had spent the night. Siddhartha had started. Siddhartha had venerated. Siddhartha had woken up. Siddhartha hadn't. Siddhartha hardly felt. Siddhartha has always obeyed his father. Siddhartha has come. Siddhartha has set harder goals for Siddhartha himself. Siddhartha informed the oldest one. Siddhartha is putting me on. Siddhartha kindly spoke. Siddhartha knew. Siddhartha knew many venerable Brahmins. Siddhartha laughed. Siddhartha lay down. Siddhartha learned. Siddhartha learned something new. Siddhartha left his garden. Siddhartha listened. Siddhartha looked. Siddhartha looked into his friendly face. Siddhartha had looked into the water. Siddhartha looked over. Siddhartha lost his. Siddhartha made. Siddhartha never listened. Siddhartha nodded. Siddhartha once again forced his mother. Siddhartha only ate once. Siddhartha opened his eyes. Siddhartha placed his hand. Siddhartha pondered. Siddhartha practiced. Siddhartha reached the large river. Siddhartha realized. Siddhartha recognized him. Siddhartha remained standing there. Siddhartha repeated, murmuring the verse. Siddhartha right here. Siddhartha rose. Siddhartha said nothing. Siddhartha said quietly. Siddhartha said tiredly. Siddhartha sat. Siddhartha sat down next. Siddhartha sat upright. Siddhartha saw. Siddhartha saw Siddhartha saw him. Siddhartha saw how beautiful she was. Siddhartha saw it. Siddhartha smiled. Siddhartha spared him. Siddhartha spoke. Siddhartha spoke in. Siddhartha spoke one day while begging. Siddhartha spoke sadly. Siddhartha spoke too. Siddhartha stayed. Siddhartha stood. Siddhartha stood silently. Siddhartha stopped. Siddhartha stopped fighting his fate. Siddhartha stopped once again. Siddhartha straightened up. Siddhartha succeeded. Siddhartha suddenly had. Siddhartha surpassed him. Siddhartha thanked. Siddhartha thanked her. Siddhartha the greedy could also die. Siddhartha the rich man. Siddhartha thought. Siddhartha thought about his situation. Siddhartha took. Siddhartha understood. Siddhartha waited. Siddhartha walked through the forest. Siddhartha walked through the lanes. Siddhartha watched him leave. Siddhartha watched him leaving. Siddhartha watched the leaving monk. Siddhartha wavered. Siddhartha went. Siddhartha will do what his father will tell him. Siddhartha will go. Siddhartha will return. Siddhartha's ear, Siddhartha's eyes. Siddhartha's eyes read the suffering. Siddhartha's face, Siddhartha's hand. Siddhartha's interest. Siddhartha's previous births were Siddhartha's shoulder. Siddhartha's soul slipped inside the body. Flocked, flowed, flowers, flowing, fly, fold, folded, follow. Saw Agni, he saw all, saw him standing, saw his body full, saw his head full, saw his own face lying, saw his steps full of, saw Kamalas, saw Krishna, saw no images anymore, saw no joy any, saw no trembling, saw Siddhartha standing, saw the reflection of, saw the servants, saw the young man standing there, saw them achieving infinitely much, saw them complaining about pain, saw them suffering. She admitted. Govinda also realized. Govinda answered. Govinda bowed. Govinda exclaimed loudly. Govinda had aged. Govinda had become a. Govinda had said. Govinda has heard the teaching. Govinda knew. Govinda listened. Govinda looked. Govinda made the gesture. Govinda realized. Govinda said. Govinda saw. Siddhartha watched him leave. Siddhartha watched him leaving. Siddhartha watched the leaving monk. Siddhartha wavered. Siddhartha went. Siddhartha will do what his father will tell him. Siddhartha will go. Siddhartha will return. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Andre. So is the dog in the background?
The dog is in the background. The dog is not part of the recording. Little Chaplain is wants to know what's going on. What am I doing without him? He's protesting.
You had all of the other background noise on the on that, and it actually fitted very well. But
of course, yes. No, I should have said, yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
I've tried to puzzle out the symbolism of the dog and the bells. You know,
Doggy dog work.
Yes. Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I did promise everybody that we've got two very, very different poets here. You've heard Andre, and now I'm going to turn it over to Terrance, and I think you'll hear exactly what I mean, that there's not a lot of similarity in some ways between these two guys tonight. Over to you, Terrance.
Okay, well, first I'd like to say thank everybody for joining. And this is like a pleasure to me because it's like out of the blue, Thomas gave me a call. And when he gave me a call, it was like a subtle voice. And I didn't know what to make of it. And so we further, we discussed things a little bit further. And it turned out perfect. So where I am today. Just a little something about words across the water, forbidden words and transgressions. I started looking around, searching on the net, and to my surprise, I didn't find anything to my liking. I actually came across things like forbidden words, like cuss words, and I'm like, okay, well, you can't talk about that at the dinner table, but I'm quite sure everybody got a short list of cuss words. So we can't do that on the air. So we're gonna move on. And so I kept going and searching. And so I started looking into different cultures. And in some cultures, you couldn't say a person's nickname if you didn't really know them. So is that a taboo? I mean, is that really? I mean, I don't know. I'm not in that culture. So, but I do know this for certain. Most people cannot call their mothers by their first name or their fathers by their first name for some odd reason. It's always father or mother or daddy or something of that nature. So you may have a type of cultural connection between other cultures and American culture. And then at the same time, we're a melting pot all into one. So kind of moving along fast forward, I started looking at things that people may say, like actors think saying Macbeth will curse a production. Chanting Bloody Mary is a bloody bad idea, and talking and taking the Lord's name in vain. Those are considered to be taboos. So some people may even say if a black cat runs across you, that you have bad luck. That may be considered to be superstition or a taboo. So moving a little bit further, I just began to kind of like search and probe around and see how I can tie my information into this as it relates to poems. But just trying to give you a little background on taboos, before we get into what I'm going to be dealing with. General taboo words are used to express sympathy, surprise, disappointment, disbelief, fear, metaphorical interpretation. Those are words that kind of tie into what we would call a taboo. And so moving along, the big taboo in American culture is money, is revenue, it's the Benjamins. Okay, say you go and you get a job, and it's a taboo to talk about money at that table. But in fact, the mere reason why you're at this table is to make money. So how is it a taboo? Is talking about money or revenue or the Benjamins at that particular time, is that considered to be a taboo, greed, or what is it? I'm not sure, but many people don't talk about that. Okay, even to the point whereas when I was growing up, we didn't talk about money as much because I'm from humble beginnings. But as we grew, we began to talk about money. As we began to learn more about finance, as we began to learn more about business and the exchange of goods for service, we began to learn more and talk more about money. And money, in fact, can change your whole situation in a blink of an eye. But the greed or the just thirstiness of money could change a person from a nice person to a distorted person or evil person or what have you. Is it a taboo? Is it the truth? I'm not sure. You be the judge of that. I'm not the judge. So moving right along, I even did a little bit more digging and probing to find out that, for example, Americans love to talk about how Americans hate to talk about money. Indeed, recent surveys from financial and market research firms have found that in 30% of cohabitating couples, one or both partners couldn't correctly identify how much money the other makes. That's interesting. You're living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, but one knows what one makes and the other one doesn't. So that's pretty interesting. So now we're going to get to the nitty gritty. The nitty gritty is somewhat of, while we're here, we're going to talk a little bit about how my poems tie into this this financial thing or this money thing, the Benjamins. So first, some things that are going to inspire you to go after money or to develop some type of sense is becoming a daydreamer. Sometimes people will sit and they may daydream all day about what it would be like to have this big house or this big car or what have you. So the first poem that I'm going to read you is a Dream Chaser. Okay, here we go. As I sit and stare, my mind is somewhere else. It was simply pleasing to daydream. I see greatness. I see places. I see things. I see me being happy and successful. I am a dream chaser. Yes, I do daydream. Talking, meditating, dreaming to myself. It came true. As I fell, and then got up, my dreams were never far from me. They were on the left and right. Proud and high-spirited, I am a dream chaser. 20-1, the odds are against me. But will I prevail? Because I am a dream chaser. No valley is too low or mountain too high. Oh my God, I am a dream chaser. In bed for rest, in bed for pleasure, I'm still a dream chaser. I dream big and consistently. I am a dream chaser. That's just something about breaking this taboo. you have to have a dream. And for some odd reason, I fantasize about the big car sometimes, or I catch myself looking off and seeing myself on a yacht. Now, I do not own a yacht. One day, maybe I will. But as for now, we're writing poems and enjoying it. So my next piece will be The Will to Win. Okay. No matter what living being can stop my will to win. Striving and surviving with a vision to win. In a land with little or no friends. Yes, this is my will to win. We were given dry lemons and we made lemonade. We were given pennies and we made millions. The will to win is not a stretch of my imagination, my friend. Not stopping, not going backwards. We only look forward, and quitting is not an option. This is my will to win. So along this stretch of breaking this taboo, you got to have some type of willpower. If you don't have willpower, nothing works. Even if you have a dream and you put nothing behind it, nothing works. My business is my business. Paying the cost to be the boss. Respect my hustle, you buster. I paid all of my bills and then celebrated like Jack and Jill running up a hill. Yes, my business is my business. I took a loss to become the boss. However, my dreams are not deferred, but embraced and manifested into glory. Yes, my business is my business. Now, if you stay on a business track, everything seems to kind of like fall in place. But if you don't, you linger, you backslide, nothing comes true. This one will really touch the hearts of many. This one is a night to remember, naysayers. Looking out into an open field as I traveled 590 miles away from hell into grace and glory. They said it could not be done with fun, but with grace and mercy, I won. Yes, I made it, but some did not. By God's grace, yes, I made it to see another day. To all naysayers, I salute you for making me great again. In your face, I laugh with amazing grace because I made it. Yes, I made it, but you said I could not and will not amount to anything. It is my time to shine with grace and mercy. I'm not trying to be braggadocious, but I'm just happy to have made it with grace and mercy. Okay, I think we may, what is our time looking like so far? We're about to top out, or are we good? Just us.
Good for a minute or so, Terrance, if you want to.
I'm about to wrap it up right now. Just us, minding my business. Riding in my car, minding my business. I got pulled over by the police for no reason. Walking to work, minding my business. I got pulled over by the police for no reason. At the shopping mall, minding my business. I got pulled over by the police for no reason. Paying my bills on the hill, minding my business. I got pulled over by the police for no reason. Helping the elderly across the street, minding my business. I got pulled over for no reason. At the hospital coming out of surgery, minding my business. I got pulled over by the police for no reason. Young, rich, strong, and black, minding my business. At my business, I got pulled over by the police for no reason. Of course, and unequivocally, I got pulled over by the police more than one time for minding my business. Is this justice or is this justice? I'm just simply minding my business. That is pretty much the conclusion of what we have here. That is just a couple points that we touched on. We have limited time, so I will turn my time back over and we'll go to the next person.
Thank you so much, Terrance. That's wonderful. So we've heard both these fabulous poets, Andre Bagoo and Terrance Robinson. I got a couple of questions that I will put to both the poets, and then we'll invite everybody else to put some questions in the chat as we go on. So when Dr. Cassidy was doing his introduction, he was talking about forbidden words and transgressions. And he talked about the way in which words can be banned and censored by authorities, but we can also impose those bans and transgressions, or the sense of transgression, on ourselves. And Terrance, in your last poem there, that naysayers one, that seems to be actually addressing that, people telling you what you can't do. And I was thinking whether both of you could perhaps talk a little bit about the way you have allowed yourselves to break out of any kind of self-censorship in the past. Andre, in the piece that you actually referred to but didn't read, you talk about starting your career as a law student because you thought you couldn't possibly be a writer. You had to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something useful like that. And so there were naysayers in your life preventing you from writing. And Terrance, there have been naysayers in your life preventing you from writing at various different times. So what has given you the confidence to move and to become a writer?
Me, Terrance, or either one?
Either one, jump in.
For me, I've never had a problem with a challenge. I come from a challenge. I mean, where I'm from, every day is a challenge. So by the mere fact that, according to statistics, I should not be here. So with that being said, it's nothing that I can't achieve. Most of the time when people are telling me things that are negative, I can tell you 10 things to your one. So each time a negative person says something to me, I'm going to say 10 good things. And by the time I get through, that person has walked off. They're scratching their head like, it's got to be something wrong with this guy. I mean, I tried to push all his buttons. I went down the right course, but nothing happened. So just pushing all of this noise to the side and just focusing and harnessing every fiber or all the energy that I have towards one point. If I do that, something has to happen. Like I mentioned the other day when we was kind of, together, pressure makes diamonds. If you have no pressure, nothing, you're never going to elevate to the pinnacle of your success if you don't have any pressure, because it's too easy. You're relaxed. I mean, you can get up, you can do whatever you want to, you can breathe, but put a little pressure on you where you can't breathe. You can't move how you want to move. You can't do the things that you want to do. And then you have to advise a plan. And once you advise a plan, you harness all of your energy towards that plan, and you just discount or push all the noise to the side, because you can't stop what people are going to say and what they're going to do. You can't stop it. So that's just my take on naysayers, and then being able to stay the course. If you stay the course, it'll happen.
So censorship in some ways, or attempts at censorship, can actually be productive, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to question?
Yeah, I think I pretty much, I agree with everything Terrance says. And he said he has a line in one of his poems he just read, "My dreams are not deferred," which is such a wonderful reply to Langston Hughes. Just going back to that question of being a writer and getting that courage to say, yes, I'm going to be a writer. I think certainly in Trinidad, and certainly in a Caribbean and even a post-colonial context, where we have been largely, where society has largely been premised on this idea of bodies as commodities or as being instrumental to very specific purposes. This idea of being a writer is something that is often, and is still today, resisted because there's the feeling that, well, no, what does a writer actually do? What does a writer produce? Why don't you do something more useful? Why don't you become a lawyer, a doctor, engineer? And it's interesting, you would think that notwithstanding how much progress we've made because of the internet and this global community that we have in terms of publishing, you would think people would think writing is more of a viable option. But ironically, I was reading something the other day where one of the young, in Trinidad, we have these exams for children to move from the lower levels, primary school to secondary school. And, I think the top scoring student was saying, talking about how many things he loved, and he said he wanted to be a magician or something like that, and his family told him absolutely not, you have to do science, do maths or something. And I just thought that was very interesting, because I mean, okay, yeah, a magician, but I mean, he had a clear passion, and yet still he felt a need to censor himself to capitulate, I guess, to power, a certain type of power that's exercised in this society. And just to go back to the first part of what you were asking about queerness and self-censorship, I think the processes kind of mirror themselves, because this is how power operates. Very often power is brute, and it's just putting people in prison or banning books, but it actually operates most vividly in the imagination. When people think they can't do something or they shouldn't do something, that can be even more crippling than actually putting them behind bars. Foucault said the soul is the prison of the body. And I think that really gets to the nub of it.
Yeah, and you made some comments in your opening, I think, about the way in which Siddhartha, we actually stop ourselves reading what's actually right in front of our eyes with Siddhartha, which is that the core of that is the relationship between Siddhartha and Govinda. But we know we sort of abstract it and we start reading it as, oh, it's all about Siddhartha's great quest for truth. And you're going, no, these two guys want to get together, want to be together, right?
Exactly.
So it's very, very weird. And we have these genres that sort of really constrain our way of thinking, right? I think we expect a novel to do certain things, and therefore we actually read in those certain ways when we might actually be missing something which is really obvious. But poetry, and to pick up again, Andre, on the thing about poetry in particular, poetry is probably the most useless of the writing forms, right? I think that's the general sort of response that people would say. I'm not saying this myself.
How dare you?
but
Me and Terrance are going to storm out.
So this is where I'm going with this. That in the general public would think of it as the most sort of remote from usefulness. It's not an essay. It's not a report on something. Novels somehow are realistic, but poems are more removed in some ways from sort of reality than almost anything. It's a very, very refined form, and the stuff that you're doing in particular is very highly experimental, right? Which is even further from that. So, and you're both doing very different things with your poems, right? And you're doing them in very different ways. So I wonder if you could both actually talk a little bit more about poetry. And what you think you can do, or what you are expecting to do in poetry that you can't do in another genre. And because both of you are actually, writing in different genres and producing art in different forms completely, because Terrance, you're a visual artist as well. What is it that poetry can do that draws you to it, despite the sort of common public idea that poetry is this sort of thing which is over there, and it's really not connected in some ways to engineering and doctoring and things.
Beautiful question. The beauty of what I have here, I was able to write this book in a short period of time, right? I achieved more with this one book than I achieved in my entire career. What do I mean by that, Terrance? What do you mean by that? This one book is on 15 to 20 platforms. I've been an artist since 5 or 6 years old. I'm not on 15 to 20 platforms with my art. So in turn, poetry in this particular writing has opened up a whole nother avenue, because not only do I do art and I do poetry and I write, but I market these things. So I've been marketing to several social media sites. And so this thing is all over it. I mean, I don't have to think about the image. I've taken the image, I put it on a coffee mug. I stretched it on the canvas. It's nothing to think about. I can market this and make it more available to more people than a $5,000 painting. So economically, writing has opened up a whole nother door of economics for me. It has opened up a whole nother door where I can come into a school or talk to somebody virtually. Now, put fine art side by side with it. It seems like people are doing more reading than art, or the interest is higher in terms of academia in this poetry book. So it's like an experiment for me to like take my art and fuse it into this. Now, wrapping up, this book only has a cover, front and back, but I have created 25 other pieces that go with this book. It's like a third edition. So now I have an exhibition that can go anywhere I want to go. And you can afford a $36 book versus a $5,000 painting. So I have achieved my goal. And I'm expressing myself beyond a flat surface or a ball of clay. So this is a whole nother genre for me, and it's exciting. Very exciting.
That's great. Thank you, Terrance. That's a really very strong defense. And it ties in with what Andre was suggesting about, you know, how weird it is in some ways that actually poetry and writing hasn't become more, I guess, viable, right, as a result of all the connections we can make through the internet, because that's what you're drawing attention to, is the way that this can disseminate so beautifully. And that was, I think that was the great dream of the people who were popularizing the internet in the 1990s, right, was that it was going to be this incredible democratizing tool that it probably hasn't quite become. But anyway, Andre, do you want to have a go at that question and think about, you know, why poetry and what does poetry do?
Yeah, this takes me back to the whole W.H. Auden debate. Poetry makes nothing happen. You know, when he said that, you know, he was facetious. Part of him was Auden. It could be very wry and facetious, but you know, he touched on a certain vein. I think to some extent poetry is completely useless, and that is part of its importance, because it's that freedom to be subversive, or to be disobedient, or to not have to fit into anybody's purpose or instrumentality. But at the same time, I do think that sometimes poetry does make stuff happen. And I'm thinking of poets like Roger Robinson, who, you know, a British Trinidadian poet, who, you know, he describes poems as empathy machines. So almost as though they're little ways in which people can come together and share experiences. And I think in that sense, a poem can do that. It can make us cross the waters, right? But of course, not all poems are the same. And as we've seen tonight, and as you pointed out, Simon, me and Terrance are different poets. And I have found that even within my own poetics, my approach in every poem tends to be very different. What I read tonight is probably, you know, the most experimental thing that I've read. But, you know, some of my other poems might be more, their surfaces might be more straightforwardly narrative. But some other poems are also very much anti-narrative. And there's this whole dialectic going on within poetry of how a poem is defined and how it works and what it does, which makes talking about the use and the functionality of poetry even more difficult. But I think certainly, for me, I embraced poetry in the beginning simply because I had this impulse to do it. I've talked a lot about boys tonight, but in school, in secondary school, I had crushes on lots of boys and I would write poems for them. And I would print out little chapbooks and make them and give them to them anonymously. So I don't know if that's why the poetry thing has stuck with me. But I think I also get within the poem this idea of masking, which initially I think caused me some unease because you can easily hide behind the mystery of a poem, you know? But coming from a society like Trinidad, where we have carnival, where we engage in all these costumes, you know, normally every year, but because of COVID, not this year, I'm very much attuned to this idea of how the mask and the performance, and I see a poem to some extent as a kind of a performance, can hide, but in hiding also reveal something of the wearer because it reveals a choice. It shows us what costume, what guise the wearer has decided to adopt, which is actually revealing paradoxically as it conceals. So with me, it's a very complex set of impulses to go to poetry. And only recently, when I published my essay collection, The Undiscovered Country, did I move away from poetry and start addressing readers directly in essays. And it felt great to be able to just sit down and say, this is what I mean. You don't have to interpret it. You don't have to, there's no game happening here. And that was exhilarating. And I don't know, hopefully, I don't know, maybe that might result in more sales. We'll see.
Yes, since Terrance brought the commercial aspect in. Yeah, thank you for quoting Auden there. The line to quote against Auden is always Shelley, right? The idea that poets are the unacknowledged legislators
of the world.
And I saw that Celia Sorhando, who I'd like to go to next, had put in the chat something about doctors these days in the COVID pandemic actually prescribing poems. And I'd been thinking about that myself because as a speaker of the faculty here at the College of Charleston, as Thomas mentioned at the intro, I've been putting out little weekly sort of updates, little weekly bulletins to the faculty. And very frequently, I've been trying to figure out what to say. And in the end, there's no better thing to use than a poem. And I think, rather than being the unacknowledged legislators of mankind, I think poets are really the unordained ministers of mankind. They actually do minister to us. They minister to our souls, and they basically speak about love, which is absolutely essential. And I was thinking when you were talking about wanting to give these little chapbooks to boys in school you had crushes on, we have love letters and we have love poems. We don't have love novels. We don't have love essays, right? I mean, poetry really is associated. There's a whole genre of poetry which is associated with specifically love. So I do think it does all sorts of fascinating things.
It's very therapeutic as well.
And exactly so, right? And people use
therapeutic
great
because when I'm writing, I'm in a whole nother zone where nobody, I really can't hear you. I mean, you're talking, I hear a lot of mumbling, but I'm actually so far into it, I'm not paying anything attention other than the pencil, the pad, or the pen. And so it helps me to go into a whole nother dimension. And it's serenity. It's serenity.
Right. I think this is why it's used so often in programs in prisons and in asylums and things like that as well. Alison, can I unmute Celia Sorhando and ask her if she wants to chime in at this point?
Certainly, go ahead.
Celia, do you want to unmute yourself?
Oh, thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but I'm happy to just chime in. Terrance, I really like the idea because as well, through the act of writing poetry, which I think can be a very transformative act for the writer, perhaps that's some of the power of poetry that maybe through, although poetry doesn't change anything, maybe poetry changes the writer, and the writer then goes on to change things. So thank you very much. I'm really enjoying this session.
Okay, thanks.
Does Nancy Ann Miller want to unmute herself and ask a question or comment? Put a comment in the chat. Maybe not.
Yes, I wanted to ask Andre a little bit more about the notion of poetry being useless. I just love this idea. And that gives it a freedom. Could you talk a little more about that?
Yes, sure. I think certainly the frivolity, that we associate with poetry, I guess is something that might not exist in a society. If we think of a dystopian world where people are only as useful as whatever purposes they serve, this idea of stepping out of that instrumentality, I think, would become abhorrent, would be, impossible. So in a weird way, it is this freedom and this ability to say, well, asking the question, what is the function of poetry, or what is the use of poetry, is already a kind of a misnomer, because it then asserts that every human endeavor, everything that we love and enjoy, because we clearly all agree that we love and enjoy poetry, must have some sort of specific function, So I think that's what I was getting with there. Yeah, with that. Yeah.
Thanks, Andre. So if I can just take the liberty of being the moderator here, when Terrance was speaking, I was thinking about the poem by Dana Joyer, where he riffs on a quotation from Wallace Stevens. And Wallace Stevens had said, money is a kind of poetry. And this is Dana Joyer's poem, Money, on that. It says, money, the long green cash, stash, rhino, jack, or just plain dough. Chop it up, fork it over, shell it out, watch it burn holes through pockets, to be made of it, to have it to burn. Greenbacks, double eagles, megabacks, and Ginny Mays. It greases the palm, feathers a nest, holds heads above water, makes both ends meet. Money breeds money, gathering interest, compounding daily, always in circulation. Money, you don't know where it's been, but you put it where your mouth is, and it talks. Or as Bob Dylan says, it doesn't talk, it swears. But Frank, you had a question you wanted to bring up in regard to the commercial aspect of this. So Frank, do you want to unmute yourself, Frank Martin?
Hi, everyone. Terrific program. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can? Okay. Yeah, I was just remarking on Terrance's observation on this. It's not really, I guess it's a dichotomy, it's a paradox, I don't know how we describe it, about how nervous people become at precisely the moment when they are having value assessed. They don't want to have value assessed in terms of money, and we consider it actually insulting to commercialize our abilities or our talents. And the idea of, if you're doing an interview for a job, the thing that is unspoken is, well, how much money do you want in compensation for your talents, your experience, your observations, your insights, your intelligence, all of these things. And in a way that relates to this journey, of course, is going on in Siddhartha, which is about self-actualization and self-discovery and discovering value, and value that may not be exactly what you thought value would be. Because in Siddhartha, of course, the disciple who achieves enlightenment does not follow the Buddha. He resists and discovers by not inversion, but aversion. So those things were fascinating to me between the two conversations.
Yeah, I love that observation of and that analysis of Siddhartha there, because he becomes at one stage, he says goodbye to the Buddha. He's like, he meets the Buddha, which everybody else around him is like, oh my goodness, the Buddha. And he's like, this Buddha, nah, you know, he doesn't, you know,
He's
have it.
normal, yeah.
Nah. And then he goes off on his merry way, and then he becomes incredibly wealthy, you know, and he meets Kamala and stuff like that. And then he learns that, yeah, this too is not not working. But I love this Wallace Stephen quote of money is a kind of poetry. I would say maybe we should start saying poetry is a kind of money.
Well, that's the other thing the two of you were saying when Simon said that, well, poetry is just the most useless. I immediately thought of how poetry inspires. I thought not only of traditional formal poetry, or if you're in a certain kind of mood, you recite poetry. One of my favorites is The Lady of Shalott, for whatever reasons, and it moves me from one mood to another mood. But when I think of lyrics of songs, what do people default to? They default to poetry, this rhythmic speech that inspires and transforms. And so on the absolute inverse of being useless, it is one of the most, I mean, what do? You sing patriotic songs if you want to fire people up. You use sound to motivate, and that's poetry. So it's just the opposite of being the most useless. It's one of the most frightening kinds of power in a way.
And think about nursery rhymes, and you know how they are fundamental in shaping not just our sort of linguistic ability, but actually conveying values in ways that we don't even know that they're doing that. Yeah. So
Which in time saves nine.
yes, exactly. Everything.
I think if you do it well, and you're in the right setting, and you do it extremely well, the possibilities are limitless. I mean, you can go very high. I mean, in terms of achievement or what have you. So possibilities are very strong with poetry if you're in the right setting.
Can I
I'll
perhaps take
continue
us
that.
in a slightly different direction now? Because I don't know very much about Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha, but I do know that, you know, it was published, Andre, you pointed out, in 1922. And so between World War I and World War II, and Hesse was there in Switzerland. And basically, when Hitler came to power, he was sort of still clinging on to his artistic notion of basic sort of abstraction and non-involvement. And he tried to sort of keep above the politics of what was going on at the time. But he couldn't avoid it, because he ended up actually having, I think, Siddhartha and all his work banned in Nazi Germany, because he obviously was not pro-Nazi. So I wonder if we can also talk a little bit about the responsibility of poets. And this is, you know, really where I come from. I mean, I was saying that this idea of the uselessness of poetry is not my idea at all. I mean, I really think that poets have a responsibility to speak truth, not speak truth to power only, but, you know, speak truth to the soul. And so, you know, can you talk a little bit about that, how you feel yourselves as political and unable actually to abstract oneself from a political situation? Anytime you write, you're involved in political circumstances and so on.
Certainly, the act of writing is inherently bound up within a political context, whether we think of politics in a broad or narrow sense. It's caught up with all sorts of matrices of power. I don't know if you all are hearing my dog, sorry. You know, he's chiming in on power and politics and poetry. But it is bound up. It is bound up in the world, and I think it has become incredibly fashionable. Or in recent years, there's been this pushback to say, well, you know, artists should not be political. We don't want to. When we go to engage in art, we don't want to have to deal with politics, and we don't have to deal with political correctness. And no, let's not. Artists shouldn't be involved in that, as though somehow there is some sort of separation, as though you could somehow write something that is apolitical. I think a lot about what George Orwell said, and he said, even when a writer declares that they are non-political, they are adopting a political stance. So I don't even think, we don't even have to go, in my opinion, we don't even have to go as far as saying it's a responsibility. I think it is an inevitability that anything one writes is political. And Simon, you've come, I mean, what you point out about Hesse and that whole problematic, his relationship with Nazi Germany and the question of, well, what was his position? What was his stance? Even his choice of Switzerland as this area that was neutral, you know, he tried to stay out of it for a while, and but privately he was increasingly, you know, fed up of them. And I know there's a lot to be said and researched in relation to what exactly was his thinking. But he's a great example, because here he is writing these texts that ostensibly have nothing to do with anything going on, and yet they are being interpreted in some quarters, and as you allude to, clearly the Nazis found it abhorrent. And I don't know, maybe they sensed the queerness of the book even before he owned up to it and thought no. But I mean, it is incredibly fascinating how, for someone who took so much trouble and so much pains to stay out of politics, what he's written ended up reflecting something of the morass of the times, in the sense of, you know, Siddhartha's his nihilism and his sense of purposelessness. Some people see it as almost in capturing this kind of very pre-war condition within Germany. So I think not only is it that poets must be political, I think we have no choice, because we literally, everything we write is political.
I can piggyback off of that one. When you're just writing, to me, I mean, regardless of what you're writing, whether it's poetry or whether you're writing a memo, you have to watch what you're saying. You have to watch the context of the word. I mean, you have to watch everything, because as soon as you send it, words take flight, they take life. You can't pull them back. And don't try to erase it, because if you erase it, it's still out there. I mean, everything that you send or you write down, it's like your personal fingerprint. So regardless if you're trying to be political or you're not, it's there. You're under close scrutiny. But many artists, whether you're writing or whether you're painting, whether you're drawing or what have you, it some type of form of, you know, a stance. You're taking a stance. You're saying, hey, this is what I believe in. This is what I'm going to do. And it's nothing that you're going to do about it. You can't do anything about it, because I'm writing on paper, pencil, paper with a pen that belongs to me. What could you possibly do to me? But in different cultures and in different places, what you write can probably get you hurt. You know, it can probably get you maimed. But you are political regardless. I mean, just the whole notion that you're going to be a writer, you're going to be an artist, you're going to do something that people kind of nitpick at. They look at it, they scrutinize it, they say that they hate it. Some people, I mean, in art and fine art, you're more wealthy dead than alive back then. But as you start looking, and we have this informational highway, a lot of things are changing. A lot of things are changing, but you have to stay the course. If you stay the course and you build yourself some type of following, or you build yourself some type of business that can sustain you, that's political, because you're at a different height of your game now. I mean, what you couldn't write, you can write now. What you couldn't say, you can say now, because nobody controls your wallet. Nobody controls your purse. It's an artist by the name of Damon Hirst. The story is behind Damon Hirst. He's a British painter. He fired his agent. Hey, you're not making enough money. You're taking too much money. So he fires the guy. So Damon Hirst controls every aspect of what he does. Nobody controls Damon Hirst. There's an artist by the name of Sam Gillen. I think he's out of Maryland or Washington area. Now, the difference in the juxtapose the two of them is one is controlled by what is said, and one is not controlled because he signs the checks. So what we're living in today, in today's society, we have more freedom than we acknowledge. We have more freedom than we acknowledge. But if you don't put yourself in a position to have freedom, you won't have it. It's just that simple. Power goes both ways. If I go into a meeting and you really want my talent, and I'm the top guy, and I know everybody wants me, I have a certain amount of power that I can walk away from the table and it wouldn't even matter to me. Because I know as soon as I walk out the table, as soon as I leave the table, there's somebody who's going to hire me based on what I can do, my talents, my skills, my mindset. So artists are in a certain type of, good position right now. I mean, it's much better than what it used to be. You don't have to have a handler today. You can handle it yourself, You can merely go to your computer, punch in some stuff, get a following, have the product, sell the product. That's the end of going in every day and punching the clock. That's the end of that. So we're talking about, we live in a capitalist society now, and nobody is doing it for free. It's about what you want to do with it. But if you're traditional, then it's something different. It's something different.
Well, thanks. This conversation has gone off in all sorts of directions I had not anticipated at all. We've got to about 6:20 though, and I'm just thrilled to see that we've got so many really interesting people on this the call. We got Khadija Ibrahim, who was previously on the Words Across the Water, and I'm now going to introduce, and I may get your first name wrong. Is it Sarai or Sarai?
It's Sarai.
It's Sarai Rudder. And I hate to do this to you, but I'm sure everybody does it all the time. She's in Toronto, and of course, she is actually the daughter of David Rudder, who was also on the Words Across the Water program a little bit earlier this year, who is the famous calypsonian from Trinidad. And of course, if we're talking about calypso, we're talking about the way in which words have power. And we're also talking, as Andre was mentioning, about words that are masked because you're using metaphor to make political statements and not necessarily speaking directly and so on. So Sarai is now going to read a poem to read us out of this particular session of Words Across the Water. Sarai, thank you very much indeed for being here. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. My poem is called The Eternal Target, and I wrote it after George Floyd was killed, when all of the protests erupted in June 2020. So it was just kind of my personal response to that situation. And this is it. Black envelops me, my red center beats, while I'm pierced by your words and shot with your weapons. My puncture is your power. Do this until you're satisfied, until my life has been denied. While your existence is canonized, I'll be dreaded, paralyzed. My puncture is your power. Play this game once, then play it again. I march with my heart held safe in my hand. Count your points, our statistics. My puncture is your power. Genuflect upon me. Heaven hears you shout, victory. Within this strong skin, I exhale knowing my puncture is our power.
Thank you very much indeed. Really, really appreciate that. See lots of hand claps going up around the place. I think that's a wonderful way to round this off. Thomas, can I pass things back to you to close things off, or to Alison to close the formalities? And basically, thank you very much to Terrance and to Andre and to everybody for being here.
Thank you, everyone. I'm talking to you on my cell phone instead of my computer because those of you at State know that we're having kind of janky internet connections, but the AT&T is holding steady. I want to thank everybody for coming. Terrance didn't tell this story, but he told me that he had written his autobiography and left it in the museum in Columbia. Now, if anybody knows the Richland County County Library, I think I said museum, but you said library. It's a beautiful library. It's my model of what a good library should be. And in that process of losing your words, you found new ones. I heard this theme that I think kind of became a theme of the evening, that in the process of chasing your dreams, you speak your dreams, you become your dreams, you live your dreams. You're chasing your dreams, you achieved your dreams. And I heard that similar idea in the incantatory quality of Andre's reading of Siddhartha. It reminded me of Siddhartha as a man. He goes off in search of truth and falls into the world of the senses. And it happens so, I won't say subtly, because it's actually rather quick, but it happens so smoothly. By the end, we are looking back at the transformation from living an ascetic life to living in the world of the senses. And I ask as a reader, where is the line between the search for truth? Where is the line between the search for the senses? I want to thank you all for coming. Let me take just a moment to talk about our next. So I'm going to try to screen share again. Oh, I probably shouldn't do this. It'll all go black for a second. Let me see. Maybe it will behave. Go ahead.
The links for the next two programs in the chat box.
Okay, well then, all I'll do is flash it on the screen. Our next one will feature Philip Nanton, and Tiffany Yannick, another Caribbean writer paired with a writer who, I don't know what her background is, but Tiffany lives in Atlanta these days. So please be here. We will be in touch with you. We have your email addresses. Please be here 14 October 2021 on Zoom. And if there are no other further thoughts.
Okay, so
Frank,
what I'm going to do is to say thank you to everyone. And I'm going to stop the recording. And if anybody wants to hang around, we usually do a little off script chat. So I'm going to stop recording now and say thank you and good night.